A single bridge is now all that stands between Russia's hold on Crimea and total isolation. The Kerch crossing, once the proud symbol of Moscow's grip on the peninsula, has become its last lifeline. And here is the part that should make every military planner in the Kremlin uneasy. Ukraine has already placed that bridge on its target list, but the burning bridges and the cut supply roads are not the real story. They are only the surface. What is actually unfolding behind these strikes is something far more ambitious than interdiction. For the first time since the war began, Kiev is no longer just trying to hold the south. It is preparing to take back Crimea by land. Let me show you how a plan that looked impossible in 2022 has quietly become the central focus of Ukraine's highest command. Start with what is visible on the map. The logistic arteries linking the southern front to the Crimean peninsula are now under near-total Ukrainian fire control. The Chongar Bridge, the Armyansk corridor, the rail lines feeding the occupation, each has been struck repeatedly. That is the claim. Here is the evidence. When Russian engineers tried to improvise, building pontoon crossings to keep the convoys moving, those makeshift bridges did not survive the night. Ukrainian intelligence found them, and Ukrainian drones erased them. And here is why it matters. This is not random shelling. It is the methodical severing of a peninsula from its mainland. Russian military convoys are now being rendered combat ineffective before they ever reach the front, neutralized by low-cost, high-precision autonomous systems like the FP2. A multi-million-dollar logistics chain is being unraveled by drones that cost a fraction of the targets they destroy. That asymmetry is the first crack in the wall. But the larger issue emerges when you zoom out from the bridges to the whole southern theater. The highways running from the Rostov direction toward Mariupol are under sustained pressure. Feeling the squeeze, Russian commanders have begun pulling units back, even from the Kinburn Spit, a position they once treated as untouchable. Think about what that withdrawal signals. The corridor connecting southern Russia to Crimea is no longer a secure rear area. It has become a kill zone. And this is where the visible object transforms into something symbolic. The drone is no longer just a weapon. It has become the new logic of this war. A side that cannot afford to lose tanks is using machines that cost less than a used car to make those tanks irrelevant. The peninsula Putin called his unsinkable ship has begun, quietly, to take on water. So the next question writes itself. If the supply lines are dying, what comes after isolation? The answer is coming from people who would know. Ukrainian officials closely tied to the unmanned systems effort have stated plainly that Crimea is being isolated step by step, that the peninsula is being cut off from the outside world, and that this will produce devastating operational consequences for the Russian army. These are not throwaway lines. When the people running the drone campaign tell you the goal is total isolation, they are describing a precondition. Isolation is never the objective in itself. Isolation is what you do before you move. And the commanders reinforcing this message add the second half of the logic. With every strike on Russian logistics and energy nodes, the Kremlin's list of safe, untouchable places inside Crimea grows shorter. Eventually, that list reaches zero. And a garrison with no safe ground behind it is a garrison preparing to be encircled. So the strategic meaning is now unmistakable. The isolation campaign is the runway. The aircraft being prepared is a ground assault. But how do you actually assault a peninsula? Here is where the strategy stops being abstract and becomes geography. The most likely main axis runs from the Zaporizhzhia front, down through the Melitopol-Tokmak line, toward the Azov coast. This is the heaviest mined ground in the entire war, the so-called Surovikin line. Breaking it with armored columns would do more than gain territory. It would split Russia's southern grouping in two and sever the land bridge to Crimea permanently. But a single door is rarely the whole plan. The second door is the narrowest one, the Perekop Isthmus and the Armyansk approach. It is the choke point, the thinnest strip of land connecting Crimea to the mainland. Geography favors the defender here. But a defender weakened from the air, starved of ammunition, and pounded by artillery, has no advantage in a corridor he cannot resupply. The choke point that protects him becomes the trap that holds him. The third door is the one Russian generals dismissed, the Sivash marshes. They treated this terrain as a natural barrier and largely ignored it. Yet for Ukrainian amphibious and air assault elements, it offers something priceless, a surprise flanking route into the rear, where the defenses are thinnest. 3 doors, and each one Russia tries to bolt forces the others wider open. Now the picture expands again, because no ground assault on a peninsula can ignore the water around it. In theory, the Black Sea Fleet should be able to answer any move from the sea. In practice, that balance has already collapsed. Ukraine's naval drones have largely ended the free movement of Russian warships and supply vessels around Crimea. Autonomous systems like the Magura and Sea Baby variants have become permanent hunters, threatening not just ships, but the port infrastructure itself. Long-range missiles supplied by allies are reaching deep into the peninsula, striking radar and command nodes. The clearest proof of what this means: the Black Sea Fleet has been forced out of its repair docks and pushed into the open sea, relocating eastward toward ports like Novorossiysk. A fleet that flees is a fleet that can no longer cover the western Crimean coast. The naval shield Russia counted on has been quietly dismantled. And the air defense? Kiev has already demonstrated again and again that drone swarms can saturate and blind it. So now combine all three: land pressure, sea denial, air saturation. This is not a front. It is a 360-degree threat that can arrive from any direction at any hour, and a defender who must guard everywhere ends up strong nowhere. This is where an outside voice sharpens the whole picture. Western strategists who have studied this theater, including former U.S. Army Europe Commander General Ben Hodges, have argued that Ukraine's path to Crimea does not run through a frontal charge. It runs through making the peninsula operationally unlivable. And unlivable is not only about ammunition and fuel, it is psychological. It is a garrison so trapped, so cut off, so certain of encirclement that its will to fight erodes before the first armored column arrives. The doctrine has a sequence. First, cut the rail junctions, the Jankoy node where Crimea's entire railway nervous system converges, and erase the Kerch Bridge from the map. Place that single junction under permanent fire, and both the eastern and western halves of the peninsula begin to collapse at once. Second, turn Crimea into a sealed trap and choke what is inside with precision weapons. ATACMS, Storm Shadow, reserved for piercing the most hardened underground depots and fuel shelters. These are the expensive tools, saved for Phase 2. Phase 1 belongs to the cheap drones, whose only job is to bleed the air defense batteries dry. Notice the elegance of it. The inexpensive weapon clears the path, so the expensive weapon never misses. And the strikes Ukraine is actually conducting in the field map almost perfectly onto this doctrine. The theory and the reality have converged. And what is Russia's answer to all of this? Listen to the rhetoric. When Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was asked about Ukraine's plan to turn Crimea into an island, he claimed he did not understand how it could possibly be done, dismissing the idea in a mocking tone. Sit with that for a moment. A senior diplomat waving away the destruction of billions of dollars of military infrastructure unfolding in real time. That is not confidence. That is a chasm between the army burning at the front and the political authority that refuses to name what is happening. Because the truth is that Crimea's entire defense was built on a single arrogant assumption that the front line would never retreat to the peninsula's borders. That assumption is now dead. And an army that cannot protect its logistics or its skies retreats into propaganda because propaganda is the only line of defense it has left. But the kilometer-long queues at civilian gas stations and the gaps on grocery shelves tell a story that no state television broadcast can cover. The mathematics of war has already broken through the wall of denial. Every anti-tank round that never reaches the front makes the minefield in front of Ukrainian armor a little easier to breach. So what, concretely, is Russia relying on to keep Crimea? Start with air defense. Through the first half of 2026, Ukraine's medium and long-range drone and missile campaign has badly eroded the network. S-400 Triumph, S-300, Panzer batteries and assorted radars struck and degraded across the peninsula. Some systems get patched with spare parts or shifted in from other regions, but Ukraine's strike tempo never lets the repairs catch up. Cheap drones keep killing expensive systems. The result? Airfields like Saki and Jankoy, the ports, the logistic nodes, none of them can be reliably shielded anymore. Now, the garrison. The forces inside Crimea are built for defense and logistics, not offense. An estimated 40,000 to 60,000 troops between fixed garrison and rotational units. Ground elements, the remnants of the Black Sea Fleet, air defense and coastal defense brigades, Rosgvardia detachments. Formations like the 32nd Army Corps and the 126th Coastal Defense Brigade anchor the occupation. On paper, that is a serious force. In reality, it is a static one. Fortifications are thickening along Perekop, Sivash, and the coastline. Trenches, minefields, anti-tank obstacles, coastal artillery. But static defenses without resupply are just well-organized targets. Ukrainian drones keep cutting the convoys on the highways and rail lines that feed them. The coastal measures tell the same story. Bastion P, Bal, and Rubej mobile missile batteries deployed against landings. Wave breakers, floating booms, extra air defense around the eastern ports. All of it static, all of it reactive, and all of it already bypassed by naval drones slipping into the harbors. Shifting the fleet eastward buys survival, but multiplies logistic cost and shrinks operational reach. And even Novorossiysk now sits within Ukraine's range. Everywhere you look, the defense is rigid where the threat is fluid. Here is the trend line. Ukraine has paralyzed the arteries, contested the air, and pressured the sea. The classical front war has been replaced by a multi-layered pincer built on cheap unmanned systems, precision long-range strikes, and the intelligent use of geography. Ukraine has manufactured asymmetric superiority in the one place Russia thought itself strongest. Now project it forward. Two scenarios sit on the table. In the first, the isolation holds and deepens. The Jankoy junction stays under fire, the Kerch bridge is severed, fuel and ammunition run dry, and the garrison's morale breaks before any major assault, Crimea changing hands less through battle than through collapse. In the second, Ukraine forces the issue with a breakthrough on the Zaporizhzhia-Melitopol axis, splitting Russia's southern forces in two while special elements probe Perekop and Sivash. A harder, bloodier path, one that risks turning into an attrition fight if the garrison is still supplied when the armor arrives. The decisive variable in both is the same: how fast Russia's logistic collapse deepens, and when the garrison reaches its psychological breaking point. Return then to where we began, to that one remaining bridge. Crimea was meant to be the unsinkable ship, permanent, unreachable, the crown of the occupation. But the unsinkable ship is taking on water, and the crew is beginning to understand that the captain in Moscow has no answer beyond denial. This is no longer just a question about a peninsula. It is a question about the future of the Black Sea, about whether cheap autonomous systems can break expensive conventional power, and about whether the old assumptions of who holds territory and why still apply at all. The coming months will test that strategy in the field. So the real question is the one no one in Moscow seems willing to ask out loud. If the isolation is already this far advanced, if the bridges are burning and the fleet has already fled, has the fall of Crimea, in the only way that truly matters, already begun? What do you think? Where does the line sit between successful isolation and the moment Ukraine commits to the ground? And once that threshold is crossed, what is the most dangerous card Russia has left to play? Leave your thoughts below.